According to the police, I'm a hardened criminal. A giraffe couldn't swallow my police record. It's too long.
I work at a hotel that has a bunch of like vintage movies because the original owner, his dad owned a movie theater, and then when he opened his hotel, he put a bunch of posters from the time he was a kid, 30s, 40s, 50s. So he kind of, when I started working there, he kind of introduced me to these type of movies. And then once I started watching movies from the 30s, I immediately gravitated to the Warner Brothers gangster films because there was just so much energy and charisma with the lead actors, and they were just so unrepentant and having fun playing their roles. I was like, man, this is just like really exciting stuff. And immediately James Cagney became one of my favorite actors because every movement of film, every genre has like its face. And I think Cagney was the face of the early gangster films. It's the rise and fall story. It's the immigrant, you know, who grew up poor and feels like the world owes him everything, and he's gonna take it whether, you know, they like it or not. It's the charisma. It's a lot of those elements that come together, and those elements peaked at that time because you had the Great Depression going on, you had Prohibition going on, so you had a lot of people that were poor because of the Depression, and a lot of people that gravitated towards dealing with criminals because alcohol was outlawed. To a lesser extent, it's almost like what's going on now with weed. Like, you'd have people buying weed off of like dealers and like going, you know, elsewhere to get weed. And now it's like, you know, you can get weed anywhere. The dispensaries, at least in New York. I'm not sure how it is in Canada where you are, but yeah, it's just like it was just the perfect timing for these type of films and for that type of actor because he wasn't tall and handsome. You know, he was short, average looking guy, had a lot of character in his face. And I think that lent more to this type of genre. You know, you couldn't have like a gangster film, you know, like The Public Enemy with Cary Grant as the lead. It's not viable, you know, even though Cary Grant was and is a bigger star than Cagney at the time. Yeah, I just love these films. I love the genre. I love this time era for the genre. And it was a lot of fun watching these movies.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree too. I love these movies. I'm a big fan of pre-code movies, what we call movies that were made sort of between 1930 and 1934. And there's a whole variety of different kinds of pre-code movies. But the early gangster films are definitely a part of that pre-code Hollywood thing. And that's actually something that, you know, changed when the code was enforced in 1934. They had a lot more trouble making gangster films because, you know, those films tended to break a lot of the rules. You weren't allowed to show certain things, you know, people profiting from their crimes, people killing police officers, you know, it was, and just the level of violence as well. Especially the pre-code films have always been very special to me. And there's also other ones that were post-code that I remember watching when I was quite young, and they always left a big impression on me. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of 1930s gangster films as well.
Also, to relate it to the last podcast we did where we focused on slasher films, there's always like a sense of like real world mixed with what's going on the screen. I already mentioned like Prohibition and the Great Depression, but also with the characters as well. Like Ed Gein was a huge influence on a lot of the slasher films we watched. And I think Al Capone is the Ed Gein to slasher films. Al Capone is what it is to gangster movies. So like so many of these gangster movies are based on like the life and times of Al Capone. So a lot of these films we're going to be reviewing are based on him, but they're very different films. But they all kind of use inspiration, I would say, from it. Just like a lot of the slasher films that were inspired by Ed Gein's real, you know, crimes. A lot of the films were different as well. So hopefully that gives enough context to what we're going to be talking about. Unless you have more context to add, we can just jump right into the movies.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so these are the top 10 essential 1930s gangster films. Not the best, but the most essential ones that we think, like, if you watch these, they'll be a good introduction. They best represent the genre at the time. So there were three seminal films that are looked at as the cream of the crop. You have Little Caesar, The Public Enemy, and Scarface, which was remade. And we're also going to be talking about the Scarface remake as well, because I have a lot to say about that. But since we're going to be talking about Cagney a lot, because he's in a lot of these movies, and we're going to be doing a Scarface comparison, we can hold off on those, and we can start off with one of the seminal films. I think it wasn't the first official gangster film, but it was the first of like that started the wave of these gangster films. And that is Little Caesar. So again, pre-code movie, and they slip a lot of things in there that would be taboo at the time that obviously is not taboo now.
I wish I knew how to quit you.
Nobody ever quit me.
And it's pretty clear to me that Little Caesar is homosexual.
I need you, Joe.
And the relationship he has with his number one guy is a little bit more than just being friends.
Can't you just forget about me?
No, I don't want to forget, Joe.
It's subtle, but not really that subtle.
I don't care how many fancy skirts you got hanging onto you. That Jane of yours can go hang.
As subtle as you can do and getting away with it. Like back then, it'd be like, oh my God, oh, like, but now it's just like, wait a minute, what are they hinting at here, you know?
I love her. We're in love with one another. Don't that mean nothing to you?
Nothing, less than nothing.
Now you don't have to worry about that type of stuff, but their relationship was interesting.
You go back to that dame, and it's suicide.
Especially when you put into the context of like the because even though there wasn't a Hays Court, there were still censors at the time, so you have to be careful how you present things and how you tell your story. But again, a guy like Edward G. Robinson, just like we spoke about before with Cagney, not your typical lead guy, but they could be the lead guy in this type of genre and these type of films. A guy with a lot of character in his face. Short guy, not the typical lead. Outside of this genre, he'd probably never be a lead. And then even when he played later gangsters, past the early to mid 30s, he was generally like the protagonist the antagonist instead of like the anti-hero protagonist that he is in this film. Love the movie, great movie, well deserved to be looked at as an essential and as a classic and as a staple of the genre. A lot of fun watching it. Brisk runtime. Is this the end of Rico? The dramatic ending that the rise and fall story, when these guys fall, they really ham it up. So a lot of fun watching this.
Yeah, it's a great movie, and I think Edward G. Robinson is amazing in this movie. The performance is great, and I think it was such an iconic role for him that he was always identified with this role. And even many years later, when he made a movie with Humphrey Bogart, he played a character
Key
that
Largo?
was very similar to the character Key Largo, yes. And his name in that movie is Rocco, right? Not Rico, but Rocco. And he's a very similar gangster. And I think in a way they were hoping that people would think, oh, this is the same guy. He's just
he
older,
survived.
even though, of course, he survived.
It's not the end of Rico.
That's right. I mean, it's not really a spoiler to say that usually these gangsters do die in the end of the movie, because that's just part of the story, right? The rise and fall. And so yes, Rico dies in the end, but then again he shows up as Rocco maybe in Key Largo many years later. So
did we watch a movie in our last episode, April Fool's Day, where there's Muffy and Buffy?
Yes.
So we have Rico.
That's right.
Could be his twin brother.
Yeah. But that's just how iconic this role was for Edward G. Robinson.
Yeah. Listen, Shane. That's what we're gonna do, Shane. We're gonna rob this bank, huh? You guys are gonna come with me, Shane. People who aren't even familiar with the movie or Edward G. Robinson are familiar with that like gangster accent, and that's where it came from that movie and from his performance.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Very iconic. Great movie.
Yes.
If you haven't seen it, it's a must watch, and it's so brisk too. A lot of action, fast paced. Great movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is this the end of Rico?
The Petrified Forest. So this was an early kind of like prominent role for Humphrey Bogart. And this was more of like a stage play that was turned into a movie. And it has a stage play feel. So definitely you have to go into it knowing that, because it's going to be off-putting. It's like, why are they not moving to other locations? Why are people like walking in and out? And like when they walk out, we don't follow them until they walk back into the diner. Like we stay in the diner. When the characters leave the diner, we leave the characters and they're entering in. So it can be off-putting. It can be like an uncanny valley type feeling where like something is off with what I'm looking at here. It's a movie, but it's not a movie, you know? So if understanding that will, I think, help the experience, because then it won't be as off-putting because you know the kind of the parameters of what you're watching. Definitely a fun movie. Early Bogart, his performance is a little stiff in that he wasn't like fully developed as an actor and as these gangster performances and things like that. I think his performance would probably play more at better in the play, and probably that's where he inspired his screen performance from. Because when you're doing plays, you have to kind of play to the back end of the theater, because you have a lot of people in the live experience, and your actions kind of have to be exaggerated. And he did this kind of like weird walk. It just kind of looked like super acting-y. It didn't seem like a natural person. Like, he was acting like a gangster. He didn't feel like a gangster. But those, I don't think are critiques from my standpoint. They're more like context. If you put all that stuff into context, I think you'll enjoy the film more. And this isn't a classic 30s gangster film in that you don't have the immigrant story, the rise and fall story, the anti-hero story. But he is a gangster, and it is a gangster film, but it's not the prototypical one that you would find in the early 30s. But it's still very much a gangster film. Early Bogart, historic from that standpoint. Leslie Howard, Betty Davis, my favorite actress, great cast, great movie, as long as you put it in its proper context.
Yeah, I actually love this movie. This is one of the movies that my dad made me tape off the TV when I was quite young. And so it made a big impression on me. And I've seen it a few times over the years. And apparently Humphrey Bogart and Leslie Howard starred in the play together. And when they decided to make it into a movie, they actually didn't want Bogart. They wanted Leslie Howard. And they were talking about Edward G. Robinson maybe doing the role. And Leslie Howard said, no, it's either both of us or none of us. So he really kind of made Bogart's career in a way by forcing them to take Bogart, because it really did make his career. Bogart at that time, he had been around for a few years. He'd made about 12 other movies, and he really wasn't catching on as any kind of a movie star or leading man. And this is the first time that they really saw, oh yeah, he's got something. But you're right, though, that it's not quite the Bogart that we have come to know. And he is doing a physical thing there, which I think he might have said he was trying to be John Dillinger. He had sort of studied John Dillinger, the famous outlaw, and was maybe trying to do his physicality. But yeah, it is a bit weird to see Bogart doing that. But I think it's still a great performance for what it is. And I think he's very menacing, like he's got this real underlying menace. You don't know what he's going to do. Whereas I think Cagney, a lot of times, he's more active and he's more likely to punch people. But Bogart has this kind of quiet menace that you're not quite sure what he's going to do, but it's not going to be good, if you know what I mean.
With Cagney, you know what he's feeling. Yes. With Bogart, it's kind of a little bit more mysterious. He looks like a worn face, been through a lot, a lot of things going internal, which puts you on unease, like you're not comfortable around him.
What's the matter with you, Duke? Do something! Shut up! Shut up!
Give me time to think.
Since we're talking about those two, let's talk about one of the films they were both in together. They were in 3 films together. 2 of them are on this list. The other is the was a Western.
You know who that is? Oh, that's the Oklahoma Kid.
Ooh, let's talk briefly about the Oklahoma Kid. So when I first started watching, have you seen it?
I don't think I have, actually. No.
Don't.
Okay.
So, when I first started watching these movies, I fell in love with Cagney. And then when I started watching the film noirs, I fell in love with Bogart. So I was like, man, like they actually made a movie together, and then they made 2. I'm like, let me Google around, see how many more movies they made together specifically. And then I saw there was this Western. Like, I love Westerns too. Like John Ford, one of the greatest filmmakers ever made. I'm not a huge fan of John Wayne, but a lot of his movies were pretty good as well. So I was like, yeah, let me check out some of these. Let me check out this Western. And oh boy, so as menacing as these guys look in 3-piece suit, they look kind of silly because they're both on the shorter side, especially Cagney.
Tell that little squid over by the piano I want to see him.
And seeing like this little guy with this giant hat on, trying to jump on this horse, and it just didn't look right. He looked more laughable than menacing. And it didn't help that the movie itself wasn't very good either. And it was very, as far as my memory of it, which I'm trying to black out of my head. You also had the, Cagney wore white, Bogart wore black, because the good guys and the black guys with the colors. And it was an experience. Unless you're a diehard fan of both of those guys like I am, I would say stay away from it. And even someone like me that watched it, I didn't really take much from it. It was just the experience to say, hey, I watched it. I watched all the movies they're in together.
You can climb our apple tree. Oh.
My next guests have been 2 of my favorites for a long, long time, as children and as grown-ups. Hunts Hall and Gabe Dell, 2 of the Bowery Boys, dead-end kids, East Side kids. They're in for an important anniversary. We welcome Hunts Hall and Gabe Dell.
The Angel and Dirty Faces were actually the Dead End Kids, and it was a troupe of kid actors that did stage plays together. And then I think this may have been one of their early films, if not necessarily their first, not sure. But I do know they made a handful of films at Warner Brothers, and they stayed together. I think the name of the group changed in time. Little Tough Guys, East Side Kids, the Bowery Boys. The Bowery Boys are what I know them for, but I think their original name was the Dead End Kids. 2 of their films are going to be on this list. This is one of them. And I'm not a huge fan of theirs because their shtick is kind of like very repetitive. It's like, okay, this is the bad guy in the group. This is the good guy. This is the guy that's going to turn on everyone. This is the guy with the heart. And they kind of just replay that, their roles in each movie they're in. But they're a central part of the film, but this film is all about Cagney, his energy. And I thought this is one of his better films.
Yes, I agree. It's another film that I saw when I was very young, and again, made a huge impression on me. So it's always been very special, and I find it very moving to this day. Like watching it again just a few days ago, I found it very moving. I think it really works.
Mm-hmm. And it has a lot of you look at, like if anyone's hasn't seen it, they're going to watch it for the first time. You can be like, man, this is so cliched. But the reason you're going to think it's cliched is because this film has been studied and emulated by other filmmakers and other studios and writers, because a lot of the things that are seminal parts of crime movies in general, not just gangster films, came from this. You have the 2 young kids who are both knuckleheads, and they got caught for a crime and they run off.
Come on, Rocky, jump!
One gets caught and goes to jail. One stays on the outside. Then they meet up. One's good and one's bad, and then it's their relationship from there. How many crime movies have you seen that had that in there? We have him trapped here. Then he sees them in the back of like a reflection. He knows he's being followed.
No, it's all right. What's the difference? I've seen everything.
he tricks them into killing their own partner, and then he escapes. There's just a lot of stuff like that in this film where it's just like, man, like any one of these tropes could be the basis or the major plot of another film.
It's my rap and I'll take it. But it's my 100 grand, I'll take that too the day I get out.
The gangster that gets betrayed by his partner. Okay, I'll do the time, you keep the money, and when I come out, we'll be partners. And then inevitably, the guy who stays on the outside betrays the guy who went to jail. Then it's kind of a revenge story. And that's kind of the dynamic with him and Bogart.
Rocky. No. No. I'll do anything.
Oh, no, you won't.
And I think that's the dynamic with both of their gangster films. Is like Bogart is the one that betrays Cagney, and then Cagney comes out for revenge and stuff like that. So, but yeah, those are just a few of the ones at the top of my head. But when you watch this film and you've seen a lot of crime movies, you're gonna be like, oh, I recognize that. Oh, I recognize this, and you're gonna see a lot of that in this film, which is again, what it's very of all the films on this list. Even if you don't think it's the best, it's the one that's aged the best probably, because all of these plot points can be in modern movies, where some of these other older films, the plot points can feel kind of dated. But yeah, great movie.
Yeah, I agree. Really like it. And like I said,
and you also have the famous ending too, where it's like, was he really a coward or did he pretend to be a coward? You know, where he finally gets killed and his childhood buddy says, hey, like, I want you to let's speak about his childhood buddy. So they made a lot of films together. O'Brien,
they did.
Edward O'Brien, I think is his name, or
is it Pat O'Brien?
Pat O'Brien, Edward O'Brien.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pat O'Brien.
Yeah.
They made a lot of films together. They were real life friends. What an asshole. Sure, he's like the good guy in this film, but he keeps asking him favors. He's like, listen, I'm gonna get the cops on you, and I'm gonna do everything in my power to bring you down and bring you to jail and get you behind bars. And James Cameron's like, sure, no problem, buddy. It's like, what? And then like at every turn when they're trying to like kill him, like Cagney is there to like save his life behind his back and not even asking anything of him, and he's like, listen, I know you're about to die, and the only thing you have left is your legacy, and I want you to kill that legacy. I want you to die a coward. I want everyone to despise you. Can you please do me that favor? It's just like, fuck, dude, like, how much are you gonna keep asking of this guy?
I don't want to die, oh please. I don't want to die, oh please.
I think it is a very moving story. And you're right, it's probably been copied a million times, and but that doesn't matter. It still works on some level. It just works, and I think in a way it's got a political message, I suppose, or a social message, or whatever we want to call it, about what is the difference between this criminal and this guy who's a priest. It's just that one of them could run faster than the other, right? It's like he got away, so he didn't go to reform school. He didn't learn all the bad habits. He didn't make all the bad connections. And the guy who went to reform school or jail eventually, he got corrupted by that. He became a bad guy, if we want to call it that. So I think it's a message that's still relevant today, and I think a lot of people don't understand that, that there's very little difference in a way between what happens to you or I or anyone. It's a lot of luck and timing, and I think this movie does a good job of showing that.
Asking questions again, huh?
It stars Humphrey Bogart. It has early film screen appearance of the Dead End Kids, and it also is directed by William Wyler. So those are the reasons to see it. Otherwise than that, it's not a great movie. It's kind of just okay. But those are kind of like the major points for watching this film. So I would put it lower on the list of essentials. But if you've seen some of the better ones and like you want more, it's like, man, give me more. This is definitely where I would say turn to. Kind of standard, basic film. I think the only thing that really stood out to me is like, man, this is like really good. I wish I had more of this. Is the the Bogart character, when he comes back to his old neighborhood and he's looking for his old girlfriend.
No, don't.
What's the matter? I ain't good enough for you.
And then he's like, listen, I'm here to take you away. I'm going to take you out of this. Let's go away together. I came back just to see you.
You remember that night on the roof?
Yeah, I remember. The sky was full of stars, and I was full of dreamy ideas.
Without saying it, very subtly, I don't know if this was a censorship thing or this was good filmmaking. Let's just call it good filmmaking. It was probably censorship thing. She never really comes out and say, listen, I'm a prostitute now and I did what I had to do. And Bogart's like, fuck, man, can't you do anything else? You fuck, like, you're like, I despise you now. It's like, and it's just like that, just that dynamic, how subtly they talk about that. And like, how like she kind of crushes him and also at the same time, like, feels herself going on this pedestal that she doesn't want to come off of, but then she has to be honest with him.
I come back for you.
I wouldn't be good for you.
More salt on the wound. It's just like, all right, like he finally like, here, take this money, like, you know, I don't want to see you again. And then she even asks for more money, just like to show how far she's fallen.
Here, it's hot. Be careful where you spend it. And keep your lips buttoned up.
I wouldn't tell on you, Marty. Not if they tied me to wild horses, I wouldn't. Honey, could you spare another $20? I got it.
That whole dynamic, those scenes together, perfect. The rest of the movie, but I would watch it just for their scenes together and just to see like the subtleties of how they discuss all of that stuff.
That is actually one of my all-time favorite scenes, I think. I love that scene. First time I saw the movie, I just loved it, and I kind of became obsessed with it. And this movie's based on a play as well. And so I actually looked up the play because I was considering that maybe I would want to produce this play and direct the play because I like this particularly the Bogart character in that scene. But of course the play is very, very different, and they kind of changed a lot of things when they turned it into the movie. So I never did do anything with it, but that scene still resonates, and for all the reasons you're saying, that it's so, the subtext is just so incredible in that scene. And I love that exchange where, you know, he kind of realizes and he says, why didn't you starve first? And she says, why didn't you?
Why you starve first?
Why didn't you? Well, what did you expect?
Because he's a killer, right? He's been killing people. So they've both done horrible things, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, I think it's a perfect scene.
It almost feels film noir more so than crime, like than Gangster. That sequence.
Yeah, it does. And I believe that the actress, whose name is escaping me, I think she won the Academy Award or was nominated.
It's a dream. I'm having a dream. What I've wanted for so long.
For that part, and it's really quite small. Like, it's a very small part. It's very self-contained, but it's so good.
I'll look it up and
so
I'll put
powerful.
it on the screen. Whatever, all that information.
And it's just this contained moment, and it starts with her walking in from the distance. She's coming down the street, and then it ends with her walking back off into the distance, and that's it. It's like that's the only chunk of the movie that she's in.
Actors like Cagney and Bogart and Edward G. Robinson, guys like these work better in these roles because there's more character in their face. Cary Grant or whatever handsome actor you want to think of at the time. I keep saying Cary Grant. Let me think of. I know so many actors from that time.
Clark Gable.
Clark Gable. There you go. Clark Gable. If Clark Gable was in this part, it wouldn't have the impact, you know.
I'm tired. I'm sick. Can't you see it? Look at me good. You've been looking at me like I used to be.
That look on Bogart's face when he finds out, not even when she tells him, but when he figures it out on his own, it's just like, oh, it's heartbreaking, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And you made a good point. I'm completely looking at it from the guy's point of view. But you're right. She has a point of view, too. Hey, you're a criminal.
Yeah.
Like, I sold my body, but you killed body. You have like a huge body. I have a body count you know, in terms of guys I slept with. You have a
Yeah.
body count in terms of the people you killed, you know, and so he's much worse, you know. So you're right.
Yeah.
You should look at it both ways. He's a lot worse than she is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I just look at it from his perspective because of his reaction to it is what really
Yeah.
like sold the scene and made it memorable.
And it's interesting too that his part is not huge. And in fact, he's gone from the movie a good 20, 30 minutes before the movie's over, right? There's a lot of movie left after he's gone.
He's not a
he's
huge
kind of,
part. Yeah. It's
yeah,
a lot about the dead end.
but he is, yeah, absolutely. And in some ways, you could parallel it with Angels with Dirty Faces in that in both movies, they kind of look up to this gangster character, although it's much, much more well explored in Angels with Dirty Faces. Here it's kind of subtle, but they do kind of look up to him a bit. They do learn something from him, the way Cagney's kind of teaching them things in Angels with Dirty Faces. And in both cases, you know, in the end, they maybe learn that those guys weren't people to look up to, perhaps, maybe.
Yeah. And William Wyler,
So,
again,
in a way they picked. Yeah.
Yeah. William Wyler is also
Yeah,
known for being good with working with actors and getting good performances out of them as well. So.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Will you kiss me here? Just for old time's sake. Thanks.
So back then in the studio era where actors were under contract, you kind of had these studios that went with themes because you have these actors under contract, so it doesn't pay you to be diverse because there wasn't TV at the time. So movies and TV kind of like were one thing before they morphed into two separate things. So they didn't come out as frequent as TV episodes, but they didn't come out as slow as movies come out now. So it's kind of an in-between type time, but they did have to churn these things out. So it behooved you to stay to a certain theme and stay to certain actors that were interchangeable. So for Warner Brothers, they stayed on this gangster theme and the everyman theme, and that was kind of the theme of their studio. We have other studios, maybe they lean more towards glamour and more handsome actors, and every studio kind of had their thing. So that's kind of why a lot of these films are mainly Warner Brothers films, because that was Warner Brothers. They had these actors under contract. Bogart, Cagney, Edward G. Robinson, George Raft. A lot of these actors were synonymous with this genre. Again, a lot of these actors kind of had the same kind of look and feel to them because, hey, if you turn this part down, I can bounce you into that. I can bounce people around. George Raft is a guy we're going to talk about later. He was very famous for turning down almost every role that made Humphrey Bogart famous, you know? So it's like some of the worst career decision making steps ever. But yeah, so just for context as to why a lot of these films are Warner Brothers and why a lot of these actors kind of are interchangeable. Even some of the footage, like you'll see some of the same footage in all of these movies. Like there's one scene where they throw a grenade and it blows up the storefront. It's kind of funny because I've seen it in so many of these Warner Brothers movies. The grenade never actually even makes it into the building. The prop grenade kind of falls back into the street, but the building still blows up anyway because actually obviously it's just a prop and it's explosive inside that's blowing it up. But it's kind of funny because I see it in so many movies and I see that grenade rolling back into the streets in so many movies. But as far as G-Men, it's a different perspective because you're talking about the law as opposed to the criminal side of things. But again, it does star James Cagney, great performance, same old Cagney, even though he's playing the other side of the law, same ball of energy, same criminal background as a kid, but he turned good. What surprised me about this film is, so for a film buff like myself, I always viewed New Hollywood, which is kind of like after the Hays Code, late 70s, late 60s, early 70s, where the Hays Code was gone, and you had all these filmmakers really exploring different things, and censorship rules were really lax. I view like movies like Bonnie and Clyde as being like the gangster film that really showed like the violence and the visual killings and like I really view that as, yo, this is a super fucking violent movie, man. So many people get killed, and I saw this movie like when I was younger, but I was shocked when I rewatched it how violent this movie was and how many characters get killed like brutally. This was a super violent movie. So even for like a modern audience where some of this stuff may not come off as great with like the special effects and the kill scenes where someone gets shot and they just hold their chests, no matter where the bullet goes or where the gun is pointed, they always hold their chest and have this dramatic death scene. This kind of stands out among those films because of how brutally violent it is, in a good way. It was lots of fun.
Yeah, I had actually never seen this movie, believe it or not. I'd read about it, I'd heard about it, because this movie was significant in the sense that it was one of the first, or maybe even the first, after the Hays Code was enforced in 1934, when they couldn't really tell the old style of gangster film anymore, where you're really kind of admiring the gangster and you're following the gangster. So instead they switched the sympathy to the police, or in this case the G-men, the government agents. And Cagney, as you said, he's playing kind of the same type of guy, but he's now on the side of good. And we can watch all the violence and we can see all the gangsters and everything, but because we're coming at it from that perspective of these are the good guys, you know, and we're rooting for the good guys, it's now okay. And I think maybe for that reason I never saw it years ago, because I thought, it's not going to be as exciting, it's not going to be as fun. But I have to say, I really liked it. I thought it was very good, and perhaps one of the best movies of the 30s, gangster films of the 30s. I really liked it.
Yeah, a lot of fun. And again, I was just like shocked when I was like, holy shit, this is violent. And you're right, because it's the good guys killing the bad guys, the violence was more accepted. If it was the other way around, no, it wouldn't have passed censorship laws.
James Cagney and George Raft, firebrands of the screen clashing for the first time. Two sticks of human dynamite thrown together in a man-made inferno.
George Raft!
All right, so I did touch a little bit on George Raft earlier and his horrible career-making decisions. All of the films he turned down that went on to make Bogart a star. So this is a list that I compiled of just the ones I found. There may be more. But he turned down The Maltese Falcon, considered one of the greatest film noirs ever made. He turned down Casablanca, one of the greatest romantic films ever made. And he also turned down All Through the Night and High Sierra. High Sierra isn't as well known, but it as to maybe a casual moviegoer. But again, it is another great film. I think it's in the 40s. That's why we didn't put it on this list. It didn't quite meet the criteria for the 30s, but another good gangster film. And I think he portrayed that performance was also Dillinger-esque as well from Bogart, because he did the same Dillinger type performance in what we spoke about earlier, Petrified.
Yeah.
So those are just a few of the films that the one of the lead actors in this next film we're going to talk about turned down, George Raft.
4 words of fire that herald the scorching picturization of the novel that thrilled a million startled readers.
So Each Night I Die is necessarily one of the greatest films ever made, but it does have one of the directors we're going to spotlight, and it also has George Raft playing a prominent role. And even though George Raft did turn down a lot of roles, he was supporting characters in a lot of these Warner Brothers films. So I think it was important to get a film that spotlighted him. And this is the closest to a lead role in one of the better gangster films that qualified under our criteria that he was in. Overall, pretty good film. Also stars Cagney as well. So you have Cagney's charisma.
I like this movie. I've seen it probably 3 times now. And I guess one other thing you could say is it's kind of a prison story, which is kind of a little subgenre, I suppose, of crime movies, and definitely one worth exploring as well. But yeah, I enjoy this one. Basically, about a guy who is framed and sent to prison. Right? He's causing a problem for the bad guys, and so they frame him and send him to prison. And then it's really kind of a depressing story about him trying to get out, and trying to clear his name. But yeah, it's one that as I said, I've seen it about 3 times, and I never really feel like watching it. But when I do, I'm always impressed. I always think, that is a good movie. I'm surprised. I never remember it being as good as I think it is, but definitely not one of my favorites, but it's definitely worth watching, I'd say.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The prison subgenre of crime films is a thing, and once we start running low on topics, I think that's one we should definitely hit up. I wouldn't put it high on the list, but there are a lot of good prison films. Yeah, I think a part of what could have made this film better is at this time, this is 1939, so we're hitting towards the end of the 30s. Cagney he made some films in the late 20s, but he really got his foot, he really became a star with the Public Enemy. And by the time we get to the late 30s, he is sick and tired of doing these gangster films. And he's originally a song and dance guy, so he did make a lot of good musicals, like Parade and different things like that. But by 1939, he's sick of playing these roles. If he wasn't, he should have been the George Raft part, and this movie would have been immensely better if he was that character, because he would have played it with more energy and more charisma. Not a knock on George Raft, it's more so praise on Cagney, because George Raft was a very good actor. But I think if Cagney was in that role, and then you had a more conventional lead guy, now I can finally bring this guy up in the right context. Cary Grant. Not even like a Cary Grant, but a Cary Grant light, a type. In the Cagney role and Cagney in the George Raft role, then you're working with something. Because I mean, it's just, the story's kind of basic, but if you elevate it with the performances, which a lot of these movies we're talking about they're just good movies elevated by performances. Then this could have been more special. As it is, it's pretty good, but a tweak in the casting, I think, could have really helped this film. But again, by 1939, Cagney didn't want to play these characters. He was doing other things. He wasn't a right fit for the film noir genre. And he did a lot of musicals, comedies, different things like that. It didn't work out well for him, so he did go back to Warner Brothers. I think they ended up kicking him more money. And he did later on go on to make, again, one of the greatest gangster films ever made I think this would have been in the 50s, that he did White Heat. Talk about a return to glory. White Heat is right up there with like top 10 gangster films of all time, beyond decade. It's just a great film. So it was kind of, watching White Heat was kind of depressing, because it's like, man, Cagney, why the fuck did you deprive us of like another 10 to 15 years of you doing parts like this? But he just didn't want to. So this is the other film that Cagney and Bogart did together. And again, another great film by a great director, Raoul Walsh. And again, this we already mentioned Prohibition, Depression, things like that were part of these films, in far as like why they were so popular and some of the topics and subjects that these films were based on. But this one was flat out the 1920s, the roaring 20s, and the narrator just illustrates the different, years as things progressed with those particular things. And so it was more overt in this film. But again, another great film, and I would put it up there with the other film they did together, Angel with Dirty Faces, in that a lot of it feels cliched because a lot of this shit was copied because it was done so well. And you have, again, Bogart betraying Cagney. You have these war veterans that, hey, they went to the war together, they came back, they separated and then they came back together as criminals. I've seen a lot of 80s B movies just like that. Even like I know it's kind of a stretch, but the A-Team kind of felt like that. Hey, these war veterans, they come back together after the war. Instead of becoming criminals, the A-Team becomes like heroes, like, you know, but you do have that storyline a lot where these guys been to war, after war they come back, usually as heroes. In this case, it's the opposite direction. And then, you know, they eventually have their falling out. You also have that prototypical classic was it Sir Lancelot and King Arthur and Guinevere story, where you have the king and his queen and the young handsome knight that the queen is the one actually in love with, and that interesting love triangle that you have in this movie as well. So there's a lot of great things to like about this movie. It's definitely way up there for me, in addition to having two of my favorite actors in it as well.
Yeah, this is another one that I don't think I had ever seen prior to this week.
Wow.
I'd certainly heard about it, I'd read about it, and I wasn't sure. I thought I had probably seen it at some point. But watching it this week, I thought, you know, I don't think I've ever seen this, and it is really good. I was really impressed. I really liked it. It could be, certainly, it's one of my favorites on this list, and could even be my very favorite, you know. I'll have to check it out again and see how it holds up, but I really, really enjoyed it the first time. It's kind of got an epic feel. There's a lot of story to it. You know, it's not like Little Caesar, where it's very, very short. It's got a little more meat on it in a way.
I guess that's a double entendre. Little Caesar very short.
I guess it could be, yeah.
Yeah. No, this is. I would definitely suggest rewatching it because it ages well. Like I said, the reason I compared it to Angels with Dirty Faces is because it does age well. And again, the more you rewatch it, the more you'll remember movies that, man, remember, this reminds me of another movie I seen, because a lot of this stuff it was emulated in other movies as well, you know. So you know, the young girl that, oh, forget you, little kid, and then you see the girl, you're a woman now. You know, it's like a lot of that stuff is in there. A lot of that stuff is in there. So I don't want to spoil everything in it, but
no,
it's definitely worth watching.
Mais qu'est-ce qu'il y a? Il est fou, il me déchante.
Pepe Le Moko. Le Moko, I think is how you pronounce it. It's a French film, though.
Yes.
But yeah, so I want to talk about this film because, one, it's a great film, and also I want to do a comparison with this with Casablanca. Later on, we're going to talk about Casablanca, because this film was very influential on a lot of other movies because of the formatting of it. It almost feels like watching it and then watching Casablanca, it almost feels like, why didn't more movies do this? Watching it, I'm like, this could have been a whole subgenre, you know, because of like the tropes that you can take from this movie. It's like, it should be emulated more, you know, because it's such a great, perfect movie. So this is part gangster, part romance, part a man. There's so much analogy in this film, and also it has a lot of inspiration that you could see, not just for gangster films, but to me, more so even film noir that could have borrowed from this as well. But you have this guy who is safe in the Casbah. Every time I hear this in the Casbah, I keep thinking of that song.
That's right.
That's I just can't. Every time they say Casbah, that song just popped into my head. But you have this criminal who's safe in the Casbah because it's this labyrinth of like areas like where it's hard to get through, hard to find people, and he's this Robin Hood type character that people just want to protect, and you can't get to him. The only way to get to him is to get him out, and it's like, how do we get him out? And it's kind of it's also tragic because even though he's safe there, he's trapped there. And this vision of like, man, like I want to get to this place. I want to leave where I'm at, and I want to go to this place. This place I'm trapped in is hell, and this place I want to go to is heaven. Like, how many films is that like the starting point for? Where it's just like, man, I hate my dreary life. I can't wait to get to X place because Y place sucks. I want to get out of the ghetto and I want to be rich in the Beverly Hills. Like, whatever the storyline is, like that's an essential story that you can find in a lot of movies, and this one does it very well. Because he's visualizing Paris as this great place. He's never been there, you know, but it's just like, man, just like any place is better than this. And to see this beautiful woman who has the same affinity and can be his escape, it's so tragic that they don't end up, you know, getting to where they want to get to together. And the fact that he ends up, you know, spoiler, killing himself at the end. And it's so tragic. It's so sad. And it's so, I don't know, emotionally this film hit me. I will admit, we're going to talk about Casablanca later. Casablanca probably hit me more emotionally than this one, but this one is just as good. I don't want to get into like which one's better, make this one's better because it came first. I think they're both all-time great movies, and I think they're both all-time great romance films as well. They're kind of romance films for guys, where it's just like, I'm not going to watch The Notebook. I don't care who I'm dating. I'm not going to watch that, but I will watch Pepe and I will watch Casablanca, and I will tear up. You know, I'm man enough to say like these movies will choke me up. But yeah, this was, I love this movie. Watching it, I'm like, damn it, why did I only watch this once? Because with a lot of the great foreign movies, like I'll as much as I love them, I'll only watch them once, unless it's something like Wild Strawberries or like some Kurosawa films, you know, stuff like that. Or like what's that movie where the devil's playing chess? It's the same director.
Seventh Seal.
Like Seventh Seal. Unless it's like movies like those, like I tend to not watch even great foreign movies more than once because I'm not a big fan of reading subtitles. But watching this made me rethink that whole strategy. I'm like, man, like this is a movie I should have been watching like at least every couple years. But this is only the second time I watched it, and I just wished I watched it more after watching it now.
Yeah, well, this is a movie that I not only had never watched before, but I had never heard of it before you mentioned it. And I'm shocked now. Like, how is it I did not know about this movie? This is, it's a great movie, and I mean, apparently very influential, as we will talk about more later. But yeah, I don't know why. It was not on my radar at all. I didn't know anything about it. And I must admit that I had a little bit of technical trouble trying to watch it. I downloaded a copy, which I discovered did not have subtitles. Mm-hmm. And my French is not quite good enough. I mean, it's okay, but it's not quite good enough to watch a movie like this. So then I tried to find a version with subtitles, and then I tried to find subtitles I could add to this, and then they didn't really sync up properly. So I was watching it, and I was sort of listening, and I was able to tell that that's not what he's saying here. And so then I kind of backed out, and I found a different set of subtitles that kind of lined up better. And I eventually was able to watch it, but it was probably not the ideal way to watch it. I would love to see it again in a better print where it is actually properly subtitled. But even so, though, I did really like it. I thought it was very good. And again, I'm just amazed that I had never heard about this movie before. I don't know why that would be, but I'm glad to know it now, and I will definitely be taking a look at it again.
Yeah, it sounds like those circumstances were not ideal. I would say when you do get the right circumstances, definitely give it another try, because there's so many plot points that are tragic in this. You have his protege, the kid that loves him, who ends up getting caught up to no fault of his own in them trying to get Pepe. They try to get through the kid. The kid ends up getting killed. And, you know, just before he dies, they hold him up to try and kill the guy who, like, basically is responsible for him dying, but he dies before he can actually kill him. You know, obviously you have the woman that's in love with him, that he's just with because he's trapped there and he's trapped with her, but she doesn't feel that way. She loves him. and out of love comes her betrayal, which leads to him not being to escape the Casbah, and him, you know, and the woman that he wants to escape with is in love with him, but doesn't know. She thinks he's either dead or abandoned him, and he's like screaming out to her, but she can't see him. And then he's literally like trapped behind that fence, and then just kills himself rather than going to jail or even escaping jail and just being trapped in the Casbah. It almost reminds me of like I made this analogy when I first started talking about this. It's a heaven and hell type thing. It's like this character who's trapped in hell because of all of his crimes. And it's like, I forget, I'm not a super religious person, but I know there's this, it's either a parable or a Bible section that talks about this guy who is trapped and there's fruit right above him, but he can't reach the fruit, and he's eternally hungry, and he's just stuck like that for eternity, and that's his hell or something like that. Maybe I'll research it and put something on the screen, but it kind of reminds me of that, where it's just like seeing him behind that fence almost reminds me of like he's trapped behind the gates of hell, and he's seeing heaven like go escape him because of his crimes. You know, it's just it's powerful stuff, man. I would definitely suggest rewatching it. It's great.
Oh yeah, yeah, I definitely will.
One of my favorite performances, the reason I fell in love with James Cagney, the reason the world at the time fell in love with James Cagney, and another reason I love this movie so much, and I think this and White Heat are two of his better performances, because he doesn't get wrapped up in trying to have redeeming qualities. I think censorship forced him to have redeeming qualities in some of his later films, and also Cagney himself, tired of playing these unredeemable characters. But to me, when he doesn't have to worry about being likable, when he shoves that grapefruit in her face, just he is such an asshole. And yeah, great film, love him, seminal movie for a reason. I can't praise it enough. I've already praised it enough. You know.
Well, I was going to say that this is one of the most iconic scenes ever in the movies, is the grapefruit, shoving the grapefruit into the face of his girlfriend, who is not one of the stars of the movie. In fact, Jean Harlow stars in the movie, one of the most famous sort of pre-code Hollywood actresses, and Joan Blondell is also in the movie, another very famous pre-code and afterwards actress. But the woman who he shoves the grapefruit in her face, I believe her name's Mae Clark, and she wasn't even credited in the movie. She's not listed in the credits, but that scene is probably the single most memorable scene, and it's been parodied, it's been referenced, it's been talked about. You know, that is such a famous scene, and it's a very pre-code scene in that it's a man performing an act of violence against a woman. You know, and it's
unprovoked.
Unprovoked.
The totally poor girl's just in love with him.
That's right.
That whole scene is just the whole scene. It's just like he's like, yeah, I forget what he tells him, like, yeah, I'm getting bored with this one or something like that. Where he's just like,
yeah,
he's just like there, like whatever, they just make love or whatever, and he's just like. The guy he's talking to on the phone, I don't even think he even broaches the subject. Cagney just wanted her to know. Yeah. It's real boring here. Like, I'm ready to move on. It's like, Jesus Christ, Cagney. Like, calm down.
That's right. Yeah.
I think another reason why that scene is so good is supposedly it was ad-libbed.
Yeah.
But those type of moments in cinema are always great. I don't know if you've seen Midnight Cowboy, but supposedly the scene where Dustin Hoffman is crossing the street and the taxi driver almost hit him. He knocks the, I'm walking over here. That was like an ad-lib scene that was really, a big part of that film as well. But when great actors ad-lib, it can be like amazing moments. And
and I think too that moment of sort of Cagney being violent towards a woman, that sort of becomes part of his persona, and he kind of does that in a lot of the movies that we're talking about. There are moments where he shoves and pushes and hits the women. Like he's not afraid to be violent towards women. That's just part of his gangster persona, I guess.
Yeah.
But it all started right here in this movie, and if for no other reason that has to be seen.
Yeah. Yeah. If for no other reason, violence against women needs to be seen.
Well,
you're doing a horrible job of selling this movie to a modern audience.
specifically the grapefruit scene needs to be seen. But yeah, it's
you're gonna get us canceled, okay?
No, I the funny thing is, like, watching some of these movies, you think to yourself, well, this gangster isn't very sympathetic. I don't really like this character in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually found, Cagney and The Public Enemy, and I mean, having seen it before a few times, I found him actually pretty likable, even though he's kind of a nasty guy.
Of course, everybody finds that's why he became a star. But that's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
These are the parts that work best for me with Cagney, where he has no redeeming qualities, but you still love him based on his charisma alone. I think like the movies that I don't like as much with Cagney is where they try to make him likable. It's like, no, he'll make himself likable by being charismatic. Don't try to force likability into him. Let him just do his thing. We're gonna fall in love with him because when he steps in front of a camera, all eyes are on Cagney. Let him do it with his performance. Don't do it with the script. And of course he's likable, but he doesn't have any redeeming qualities at the same time.
No, that's true.
I can't think of one good thing he does in this movie. It's like,
no, not really. No.
Yeah. But and you also have, I'm not sure if this is the first time it happened, but you also have that iconic scene that's been in a lot of movies where the guy goes into the store, says, "Hey, can I see that gun? Oh wow, interesting gun. Man, how does it work? Oh, that's how it works. How do you load up the bullets in there? Oh wow." Stick them up, it's just like, how many movies has that been in? I remember The Getaway, directed by one of my favorite directors. Why can't I think of his name? He directed Bring Me the Heaven with Fredo Garcia, The Wild Bunch,
Peckinpah.
Peckinpah used that scene in The Getaway too.
Yeah.
So it's been used in a lot of B movies and even a lot of great movies like The Getaway. But that scene has been reused a lot. I'm not sure if this is the first one, but it might have been, because we're talking about like what a silent movie used a scene like that. I don't know. And this was one of the early talkies, so it might have been the first.
It might have been, yeah. It's possible.
But definitely a scene that I'm sure a lot of people have seen in a lot of movies. So.
Yes, for sure.
From Hitman.
That was a fine job, Tony. Remember, that's only chicken feed. You've stepped into big company.
To Gang Boss. This is the story of Scarface Tony Camonte, Scarface.
I have a huge history with Scarface. So I loved Scarface as a kid because at the age I was when the movie was out, was super young. And at the time I was in Guyana. In Guyana, you're talking South America, you're talking when you get outside the US, Canada, major places like that, a lot of the cultural stuff hits late. So it's like what's happening now is going to be happening in some countries like Guyana, 4 or 5 years from now. It's like it has to be a happening thing, then it'll be happening there. So they're always behind the times. So the movie was kind of behind the times there, and then like a lot of the older people in the family, uncles and stuff like that, oh yeah, Scarface. So we'd go to these places, not like real movie theaters. I don't know what the term for them would be, but it'd just be like this place where a bunch of chairs and they have played on the TV. I think like they call it closed circuit, but I think closed circuit is more so like live stuff. But I'm not sure what the exact terminology would be. But it wasn't a movie theater. It was just a place with like a decent sized screen, and you'd go in and you sit down and watch the movie. I don't even know if you had to pay. Maybe you just pay for drinks or stuff like that. But I think that was the first time I saw it. But I'd watched this a few times as a kid, not understanding everything I was seeing. But just more so knowing like the older men in the family loved it, and I would get tagged along to watch it. And then when I fully be able to grasp what I saw, I became more critical of films. And I heard so much as a little kid, this is the greatest thing ever, this is the greatest thing ever, this is the greatest thing ever. So I would compare it to like The Godfather, or like 2001: A Space Odyssey, or just like some of the greatest films I've ever seen, Wild Strawberries, etc., etc. So when I rewatched it with more critical eyes, I was like, no, this movie, like the context in which I watched it, comparing it to those movies, I'm like, this movie doesn't compare to those. This movie's a piece of shit. I hate this movie. And I'm like, the classic, that's what you got to go with. So then when I watched the original, I was like, man, this original, this is it. This original is so much better than the remake. This is the original way to go. Obviously, I rewatched both of them. I'm going to talk about my experience watching the 83 version later. But when I rewatched this is a classic. This is a great movie. This may be my favorite movie on the list next to Pepe. But my God, this movie is just as hammy as the 83 version. He's having Paul Mooney is having a ton of fun in this movie, but for all the critics that hate the 83 version because it's so over the top and love this version, no, I'm sorry, these movies are both equally over the top. People critique they critique Al Pacino because I think Al Pacino is Italian and he's playing a Cuban, and like, oh my God, his Cuban accent is so over the top, it's so cartoonish. Okay, Paul Mooney's a Jew, and he's playing an Italian, and he is equally as cartoonish and over the top, and equally as much fun. Mm-hmm. I love Cagney, one of my favorite actors of all time. So much fucking energy when he steps on the screen. I'm sorry, he cannot hold a candle to Paul Mooney in this performance. Paul Mooney is so over the top in every scene. Like, every time he steps on the screen, I started smiling because I'm like, oh my God, what's he gonna say or do now? He's so unpredictable, so over the top, so ridiculous, and so much fun. It says a lot of action for a movie in the early 30s. You have to put it in context. A lot of these car chases and guns and stuff like that, very new for that time of early talkies. So there was a lot of time and effort put into it. You have a great director and a great producer with Howard Hawks and Howard Hughes behind the scenes. You have, again, another movie loosely based on Al Capone. Al Capone even was, I think, a part of the research for the film because I think he wanted to get the movie shut down, and they eventually got him to like help out with some of the accuracy stuff. My God, this is such a fun movie. I mean, I could rewatch it right now and have just as much fun. This is a great movie. Don't deprive yourself because it's an old black and white movie. This movie is so much fun. Again, Paul Mooney, when I saw this, I was like, I have to watch every movie Paul Mooney's made. They do fall short because you have movies where it's like, yeah, this is fun to see a Jewish guy play an Italian, but when he starts playing an Asian character, and I think the Sweet Earth or something, or the Good Earth. Yeah, Earth, yeah. I was like, oh God, this is the guy I like. You know? But with Paul Mooney, I saw this, and I saw I Was a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, and those are the first two movies of his I saw. I'm like, this is the greatest actor ever to live, because those are two of my greatest performances. Those are two of the greatest performances I've ever seen. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't watch all of his filmography, but I would at least watch those two. And again, the people behind the scenes, the writing, the directing, this was a perfect movie. And you also have the taboo stuff with the sister and the ways. Yeah. Obviously, the 83 version went a little bit further with incest stuff, but yeah, the incest stuff, which again is it adds another layer to like over the top craziness that you're watching. But yeah, I just love this movie so much.
I do too. Again, it's a pre-code movie, which is why we have things like the strange relationship he has with his sister. And I have to say that I, of course, saw the 80s movie first, and I had assumed that stuff would not be in the 1932 movie because I didn't appreciate pre-code movies. I didn't know that pre-code movies existed. I just thought there's no way that that's in there, right? It's in there, and it's very clearly in there. It's so clearly in there. I couldn't believe it.
Stevie Wonder could see it's in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's violent, for its time. It is so violent. And I think it is one of the reasons why they ultimately enforced the code in 1934, because that movie and many others were just so violent, or they were so sexual or whatever it was. But this movie was definitely one that they were not happy with. The censors were not happy because it was so violent. And it still holds up, I think, in that way. It still seems
does it?
it's a violent movie. You know, there's no way around that. And it's got really great moments in it, some of which were used in the 80s as well.
A lot of it was used. The 80s version is a remake. I wouldn't even say it used a lot of stuff. It's just a remake.
Yeah.
It remade everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, this is part of the story for me, is that I knew about the 80s film first, and I remember at the time there were people saying, oh, this is not a remake. This is just a movie using the same title. Like, this is what some people were saying. And so I just kind of believed it. And then when I watched the early movie, I was like, oh, what? The 80s movie is the same, you know, like it's totally a remake. I mean, yes, they changed some things, but it's totally a remake. I don't know why people were saying it wasn't. But the amazing thing is that it holds up, you know, because the 80s one was so violent and it was so notorious, but 1932, it was just as violent for the time, and it still holds up today in that way. And great performance as well. And George Raft is in this one too, right?
Yeah, George Raft there's a great scene with George Raft. I kind of like the George Raft character. I don't know what it is about characters that are the sidekicks to like the bad guys. I don't know if it's their loyalty or what it is, but like even with the remake and this one and just other movies I've seen where you have this, even with The Public Enemy, even if the sidekick isn't as good of an actor or isn't as flamboyant, just their loyalty to the guy that's the main character just makes you like them. And when I first saw this movie and I saw George Raft look at his gun and then look at the door and then walked out, I was like, he's not going to take my gun, is he? They're going to kill him? And then when he shot him, I was like, oh my God. That's just that subtlety of him just looking at the gun and then just thinking about it. And then they don't show you whether he picked it up or not. You just hear the gunshot. I'm like, oh my God, he should have picked up the fucking gun. You know?
Exactly. Yeah. And he is responsible for one of the most iconic gangster images as well in this movie, in that he's flipping a coin, right?
Yeah,
he's always flipping a coin, and that became something that they would parody later on in cartoons and stuff. You know, the guys who are always flipping coins. That's where it all comes from. Scarface.
Yeah.
You know.
And also another thing that's in a lot of other movies too is what the hell was it? I just had it in my head, then I just got distracted. Oh, it's the whistle. The whistle. As I think this may have been like when the whistle comes, you know danger is coming. I love the way because you don't see Paul Mooney at first. You hear the whistle, then you see the guy get killed. They put it in your head. When you hear that whistle, danger's coming. And every time he's about to do something bad, he whistles. And even when he goes to kill his boss, he's whistling. He's coming and whistling. The whistle, that's been redone in a ton of movies, including like the Stepfather movie. I think the Stepfather movie, I don't know if he whistled or he sung a song, but that would be one way that he would end up getting caught as well, is the whistle with the... But they've used that a lot in other movies as well. It's like the killer's coming, and how do we know the killer's coming? Because we hear a limp with his foot. We hear him whistling. We hear him singing. We hear that signature that triggers to the audience. Like shit's going down, you know. And then I love the start where we get introduced with him, where we just hear the whistle, we see a shadow, we see someone get killed. We know that's the guy, and when we hear that, danger's coming. So that was the other thing I was trying to think of. But absolute great movie, man.
The crime scenes in this film are based on events that actually happened.
Don't you know it's Valentine's Day?
Produced by Howard Hughes, directed by Howard Hawks. Scarface.
Hey, look at the monkeys there! They think they're gonna get Tony Kamani, eh?
We've hit the end of the list. Am I correct?
I think so.
Yeah, so we've hit the end of the list. So I would say we could break it down a little bit, I guess. Again, comparisons with Thief of Joy being my prerequisite note here. I would suggest watching all of them, but if I had to say, like, you must, after listening to this, if you listening to this, these are the movies you must watch if 10 is too much for you. Angels with Dirty Faces, The Roaring Twenties, Pepe Le Moco, Scarface, Public Enemy, and Little Caesar. I would say those. I mean, if you want to leave out Little Caesar, you can. If you want to leave it to a top 5, if 10 is too much for you, but man, those 6 are just like all-time great movies. The others are more so like, listen, you like these, you're gonna like those movies as well. They're all worth watching. But yeah, some of the movies on this list are some of the greatest movies I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts on the top 10?
No, I would just say those first 3, Little Caesar, Public Enemy, Scarface, because they're just so influential and iconic. I would definitely include all 3 of those, regardless of whether you do a top 5, top 6, top 10. Those 3 are absolutely essential to anyone who wants to understand the genre.
All right, so now we're going to get into our director spotlights. The first is Roy Del Ruth. When you talk about this era of Hollywood and filmmaking in general, we already talked about earlier in the podcast, it's a studio era. People were under contract, they made movies for studios, there were people for hire. This was like a 9 to 5 punch in, punch out type thing. So you have a lot of directors in this era that made 30, 40, 50 movies, some of the great ones over 100, depending on how great of a director you are, or depending on how much of a studio guy you were. So a few of the directors we're going to spotlight for this, they're pretty much just studio directors, so there's not a lot to get into with their past. It's just more so a couple of guys that made more than one prominent gangster films throughout the 30s. The first we're going to talk about is Roy Del Ruth. He made a couple with James Cagney. These weren't, I would say, the better Cagney films. That's why they're not on the top 10. But again, if you like this top 10 and you like James Cagney, and again, if you like 30s films, you're going to like James Cagney and you're probably going to like these movies. But again, they're not higher on the list because they aren't on the top 10, but I think they're both worth watching. So you have James Cagney, who became a big star with The Public Enemy, and he's trying to make movies that are kind of like drift him away from that gangster type thing. And this was one of those roles that he got, that the studio got for him, was like, hey, technically you're not playing a gangster, but everywhere you go online, this is listed as a gangster movie anyway. So in this, he's more so of like a con man, like small-time gangster. Now, I think this was a movie where he actually flat out said,
the world owes me a living, and I'm going to collect it, see?
One of the tropes in the movies that are part of these gangster movies, hey, the world owes me, and I'm going to take it. And that's kind of the mindset of a lot of the characters in these movies. The world owes me a living, and I'm going to take it. And he pulls off little scams and different things like that. The main reason to watch it is for his charisma, for Cagney. The only thing I'll say is the ending was a little weird in that it was kind of like, I'm not sure if this was a poor execution or what, but it was kind of like a tragic ending played for laughs. And it's kind of weird because he goes to jail for the crime of the girl he loves husband, and then at the end of the movie in jail he's like laughing and smiling, and then credits.
If I had the wings of an angel, honey, over these prison walls I would fly.
Dude, you're in jail for a crime you didn't commit, and you're happy because the girl that's married to the guy that put you in jail says she likes you? It was just a super weird ending. I wasn't sure how to feel. I wasn't sure if maybe the actors should have performed the scene a bit differently, or the direction should have been different. But the ending was kind of like weird, but overall the journey was just kind of like fun, charismatic James Cagney. And it was a decent watch, pretty short film as well. So it's if you like these type of movies, you're gonna like this.
Yeah, I had never seen this one prior to this week, but yeah, I was gonna say it's kind of almost played more for laughs in a way than some of the other films, and you know, it's almost more like something like The Sting, maybe, where people are kind of, I mean, he falls victim to a con early on, and then he kind of gets revenge later by conning the same people who conned him earlier. So it's kind of got a bit of that Sting kind of feel. And you're right about that ending. I have to say that was strange in a lot of ways, because I mean, if I understood the situation correctly, and I suppose this could be spoilers, but the guy who he's supposed to be helping, the husband of the girl, he's going to get in trouble because he's taken money out of the safe. And so Cagney's going to pretend to rob the safe, and that way this guy won't get in trouble for the stuff that's missing. But then he calls the cops and turns Cagney in.
That's him.
So aren't they going to notice that Cagney doesn't have the stuff, that it wasn't in the safe? Like, doesn't that kind of expose himself to, like, how does that make any sense? Like, I don't get it. I don't get why he would have turned him in there. It makes no sense to me.
I didn't mind if they were going to have a downer ending, but they didn't play it as a downer ending. Like, I like downer endings, but they played it like a happy ending. They did the downer ending, but they played it happy. If you're going to play it happy, just have James Cagney get away at the end. The husband goes to jail, and Cagney goes away with the girl. Yeah. If you're going to play it as a downer ending, then just play it as a downer ending. It just didn't make sense.
Yeah. No, it didn't really make sense. I didn't get it.
The only thing I can think of is because of the censors, maybe Cagney couldn't get away with it, but this was 31. Like, there were censors, but the Hays Code wasn't in effect yet, so they could have gotten away with it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a weird one. It's a weird one, but it is largely a fun movie. So you know, it's still an entertaining time, but a bit of a head scratcher at the end, I have to say.
The next film he made with Roy was 2 years later, Lady Killer. Again, you have the violence towards women that you love so much, where he's safely dragging her by her hair. You know, it looks like he's dragging her by her hair. He's really just holding onto her hair, and she's holding onto his wrist, and it's the wrist hand that's pulling her. But you do have that iconic shot. They loved it so much they put it in the poster of him dragging her away. This one is more of like similar to the first one, where it's just more like small time gangster stuff, small time cons. And again, he gets wrapped up with some con people. Things go awry. They end up betraying him. Kind of a similar setup and similar situation. And again, same director, same actor. So a lot of it felt similar. The only thing is this kind of goes off in another direction, in that he becomes an actor in the movie, and he becomes a big Hollywood star. I didn't like that diversion. I would have preferred if they kept all that Hollywood subplot out. Because prior to the Hollywood stuff, I kind of liked it. I liked it a little bit more than Blonde Crazy. But the whole Hollywood subplot of him becoming a big Hollywood star was it didn't really do anything for me. The only part of that whole section that I liked, they kept getting fan letters, and they're like, man, look at all these fan letters. We gotta make this guy a star. He's great.
And you should see the fan mail he's been getting. Between 200 and 300 letters every week.
And then in the next scene, you see Cagney's making his own fan letters. I thought that was brilliant, and that was hilarious.
Isn't there some kind of club that mails letters from all parts of the world? Yeah, there's a mailing bureau for stamp collectors. That's all I wanted to know. We're joining up. I gotta branch out of my fan mail.
But that whole section of the movie, that's the only part of it that I liked. But I loved the beginning, the bookend. The beginning and the end felt very like a typical Cagney movie, and it was very entertaining. But that middle part, the only part I liked was that sequence. And that sequence, I knew it was coming because I've seen this movie a couple of times because I'm a huge Cagney fan. But even watching it again, I was just laughing out loud. You know?
Yeah. I did think that was clever too, and I guess in some ways this movie is kind of an early attempt at Hollywood kind of satirizing itself in a way, you know, and Cagney almost satirizing his own image in a way, because they invite him to be in the movies because they're looking for people who look like they could be gangsters. You know, they're not the typical sort of good-looking people, and so it kind of, you could see it as a bit of a satire of maybe Cagney's own story in a way, and he learns about the fan letters from the big female star, right? She tells him that that's how she became a star, is that there were so many fan letters that came in, so he got the idea to write his own fan letters. And I thought that was all very clever. It's like a, you know, poking fun at,
if the Hollywood stuff, they played it as satire and there was more of that, I would have loved it. But that was all of it. You know, the rest of it didn't really.
Yeah. Well, I think they also missed an opportunity because they talked about needing gangster types, but then they keep putting them in movies that aren't gangster movies, you know? And I wondered why they were doing that. Why weren't we seeing gangster clips? I thought that might have been more fun in a way. Yeah. But yeah, ultimately, I would say it's...
Yeah, the only crime movie we saw him in was the one where he was an extra, where he first got noticed. But yeah, they sprayed him down and played him as an Indian. He was in a romance film.
Yes.
Like none of these, you're right, none of these films, they didn't line up with what they were showing you, didn't line up with what they were saying.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, overall it's basically a silly movie in a way. It's just kind of silly, but it's fun. You know, it's kind of a fun, silly movie, and not a very serious gangster film.
Yeah. So again, these are listed online as gangster films. And again, you can view it as gangster films, and then he's playing like a small-time hustler type gangster type character. But again, these aren't essential films. They're fun films. If you like Cagney, if you like these era of filmmaking, if you like these gangster stuff, then they're good supplementary movies to watch.
And I think maybe one thing to say about the director, Roy Del Ruth, is that he made about 122 movies. Like, he made a huge number of movies. And I think over 50 of them before the 1930s. So he made a lot of silent films, a lot of comedies. And once the sound came in, he made a lot of musicals. So even though he did do a number of gangster type films, you know, he may have been more at home in comedy and musicals and stuff like that. And I don't think he made a single really hardcore gangster film. I think they're all a little more comical or offbeat in some way, maybe.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, he did direct the very first version of the Maltese Falcon.
Yeah, the one with I think Betty Davis was in.
Maybe.
No. The Betty Davis one was Satan Met a Lady.
Oh,
so
right.
The first one was Satan Met a Lady, which was the Maltese Falcon, but it wasn't called the Maltese Falcon. There were three.
Right. Yes.
Satan Met a Lady, then the Maltese Falcon, then the remake of the Maltese Falcon. But Satan Met a Lady was also the Maltese Falcon.
Right. Yes, that's right. So that's kind of interesting, but it's certainly not a classic the way the famous version of the Maltese Falcon is.
Yeah, the George Raft movie. Oh, I'm sorry, the movie George Raft turned down.
That's right, yes.
Speaking of George Raft, the next filmmaker was the director of Each Dawn I Die, which we talked about earlier. And he was also the director of G-Men. You want to talk a little bit about this next director?
Yes. So according to the IMDb, his name is pronounced William Keighley. I might have said Cayley just by looking at it, but apparently they say it's Keighley, so I'll go with that. So William Keighley, he didn't make as many films as Roy Del Ruth, maybe only 39 or something like that, which by modern standards, that's a lot. You know, modern Hollywood directors don't make that many movies, but he really only spent about 20 years in Hollywood. He had done a lot of theater before that, and he really came to Hollywood just as sound was coming in the pre-code era, and he made some pre-code movies, including one that I like called Ladies They Talk About, which is a very early women in prison film, almost 20 years before Caged, which is sort of considered to be the first women in prison film, but oddly enough, there were some much earlier than that. Yeah, he made one of the great gangster films of the 30s, the first one, which is G-Man, which we talked about earlier as one of our
For
top
more
10.
details on G-Man, it'll be in 2 separate videos, a separate G-Man video for just that review, and also part of our top 10 essential 1930s gangster films. So we don't have to talk too much about G-Man again here. Just to say, like you said, it is one of the better gangster films that we saw. Super violent for the time period.
Yes.
Very entertaining. And again, probably got away with more violence in the other films because the law or the cops in this situation were the good guys, as opposed to the other way around.
Yes, and historically significant because it may have been the first film to sort of take that angle and usher in a new kind of gangster film. So for that reason alone, William Keighley is notable as a gangster film director. But he also made Each Dawn I Die, which we talked about on our top 10 list, which is sort of at the very end of the 30s, 1939. So we're kind of getting near the end of this sort of glorious period of gangster films. And like I said, I think it's good. I enjoy it. It's probably not one of the best of the decade, but it's
Each
well,
Dawn I Die,
worth.
we did talk about it in detail, but I did want to leave something back on my thoughts on it because I know we're going to talk about it again. This is another movie like we just spoke about with Roy Del Ruth, with Blonde Crazy that had a weird ending. This is another movie that had a weird ending. So George Rapp escapes from prison, all right? The decision making by these characters is just baffling to me. So he says, hey, help me escape, James Cagney, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to help get you out. I'm going to find people that got you and I'll get you out. If you're going to agree to help him escape, you're already doing something wrong, right? So morals shouldn't play a part in your decision making. But then he tells his photographer and his newspaper people to say, hey, watch this window and be here in the courtroom because you're going to see something happen.
Yeah.
And because of that, he's like, I'm not going to help you. You betrayed me. Dude, why are you playing the moral game now of like, hey, like, I'm a newspaper guy. I have to stick with my morals. I'm not you. I'm not a criminal. I did what was in me to do. I do the right thing. No, you did the right thing. You wouldn't let a criminal escape. Why are you taking a moral stand that you have to film him escaping so it can be on the newspapers, then making it harder for him to then go out and help find the guy that killed you because you're putting a giant fucking spotlight on him by putting him on the front page of the newspaper. And you're also going to make him say, fuck this guy, I can't trust him. So that was just insanely stupid decision making. And then when you're going to say, hey, you know what? This girl that loves him talks me into helping him, I'm going to help him. Your way of helping him is going back into prison? You escaped. You're out. Think of another plan that doesn't involve you going right back into prison and then end up getting killed. Like, first you dislike that you like the guy enough that you're gonna say, hey, all right, let's work together and I'll get you out, right? So you liked him enough for that. He's your buddy. He saved your life from the guy that was gonna shank you, right? All right, so you guys are buddies, right? So you like him. You like him. You don't love him. You like him. And then he does this whole photography stunt, and maybe you were going to betray him anyway. But now for sure you're going to betray him because he had that whole newspaper stunt he did to you, right? Yeah. So now you hate him. You're like, fuck this guy. Then you get talked into thinking, hey, he's a good guy. Maybe I shouldn't betray him. So now you like him again. Where do you get to the point where you love him so much that you're willing to go back to prison and get killed to let him out? Like, where did that leap come from? Where did I not see that? Like, it just didn't make sense. Like, why is your plan, I'm going to go back to jail and get killed to get this guy out of prison? The guy who probably, like, within the time frame of the movie, a few months ago, you were just like, fuck him, let him rot, you know? that switch didn't seem justified. His sacrifice didn't seem warranted. It didn't make sense for his character to do that.
No, I agree that none of that really made sense. I don't know why, Cagney's character would have tipped off the reporters, because who cares? Like, it's not really that important that they be there to get a picture. Who cares, right? It's not going to change anything. And I mean, he's risking something there too, because he has to pretend that he knows nothing about this, right? He did not help this guy. But now he's tipped off his newspaper, so it kind of puts him in a bad light, right?
Yeah.
So it makes no sense.
You're right. He could have easier pretended he didn't know anything to do with it if the newspaper people weren't there.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and then, yeah, why does he go back in? I mean, he says something like, well, I escaped once, I can do it again. Which, of course, I don't think we really believe that, right?
No.
He got away.
You're going to spend months to years of your life trying to escape again when you were just on the outside?
Yeah. But I guess it's supposed to be some sort of macho code or something, honor among thieves, right?
But he was dishonorable. He betrayed Cagney, who let him out.
I know. It's, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. I agree.
No.
Yeah.
I think it makes as much sense. His decision-making, George Raft's character's decision-making is about as bad as George Raft, the actor's decision-making. Yeah, that could be. Yeah. So people who are just watching this clip and haven't seen the whole podcast, George Raft famously turned down virtually every role that made Humphrey Bogart a big star. So that's that reference there. But again, these are like minor critiques that I didn't get into with the review because I did actually like the movie, even though I didn't love it. I liked it kind of how George Raft likes Cagney but doesn't love him. But so I only bring up this just to get a little bit further in depth, since we're getting more in depth with this filmmaker and stuff like that. But overall, I mean, all this critiquing makes it sound like I didn't like it. That's why I didn't get into this part of my critiques during the review, because I do like it. But again, just to flesh it out a little bit more, I just felt it was important to bring that up at some point.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Fair enough. And so William Keighley, he made at least one great gangster film, and had a fairly short run in Hollywood compared to some of the Hollywood studio filmmakers, but he left behind some good films, so he deserves recognition.
Part of the reason why I didn't like it, Scarface the '83 version, is because a lot of the older people in my family who were of the age to watch this movie and really appreciate it thought it was the greatest thing ever and compared it to other great movies. And I just saw it as like this campy, over-the-top nonsense. But rewatching it, yeah, it's campy and over the top. Oh my God, is it fun? It is so... I don't know if I've ever had so much fun watching a movie in the last 20 years. Like, this was so much fun. It's a long movie, but it doesn't feel long. Because, like, there's so many quotable lines. Like, first you get, hey, Chico, first you gotta get the money, then you get the power, then you get the women. And you got the rules to the game. He's like, never underestimate the other guy's greed. And then and then you got Michelle Pfeiffer, rule number 2, never get high on your own supply. And of course, for those who are familiar with like Biggie Smalls,
know you heard this before.
Don't get high on your own supply.
The 10 Crack Commandments, where he goes over those commandments as well. He extrapolates on that. Being someone in Brooklyn, that was a big song for me growing up as well. So this is a thing that had a strong influence on hip hop culture, a strong influence on other films moving forward, and obviously it was influenced by a movie before it. But yeah, is this movie cartoonish? Absolutely. Is a great actor like Al Pacino in his prime, was this probably beneath him? You're goddamn right, this guy was in The Godfather. Is this portrayal of a Cuban completely stereotypical and maybe even borderline offensive? Fucking yeah. If he was doing that in this era, he'd be canceled. But is this movie entertaining? It's an 11 out of 10 for entertainment. The push it to the limit, the playing the whole goddamn song in the middle of the movie, the bags and bags of money, and then like the banker, his eyes bugging out of his head as he's seeing everything. He got the tiger as a pet. It was just over the top. And then him betraying the gangster. Tony, you fucked me, Tony. I told you don't cross me, Tony. And then Tony doing all the piles of coke and dipping his face into it. And behind him, you see in the cameras all the guys coming in and infiltrating his mansion to come and kill him. His sister with the naked saying, "Come and take me to, say hello to my little friend." You know, it's just like everything about this movie. You know, the bad guy, you guys can say goodnight to the bad guy. Like everything about this movie is great, man. And I can go on and on and on, but at some point I have to let you get a few words in, don't I?
Well, maybe, but yeah, it's a very entertaining movie, without a doubt. And I remember when this movie came out, and I really wanted to see it, but I was too young. And so I actually bought the book because, you know, at the time you could buy these movie tie-in books. And I would do that, you know, because I wanted to see these R-rated movies that I couldn't get into. So I'd buy the book and I'd read it. So that was my first experience, was reading that book. And then eventually I saw the movie. And of course I loved it. And I believed at that time that it was not a remake, because that's what some people had been saying. This is not a remake. This is just, they've taken the title and they've made their own movie. But when I did finally see the original, I was shocked at how pretty much they're the same movie. And you know, the thing with the sister, which I couldn't believe was in the original, and the world is yours, as you commented on. You know, that's such an iconic thing, where it inspires him, and then I guess he takes it and he puts it inside his house in the 80s version. The world is yours. It's like it's a special symbol for him. And there it is in the original movie, you know, it's totally there. So why some people said this wasn't a remake, I don't know. I don't know why they would have said that, but yeah, it's an enormously entertaining film. Every time I watch it, you're right, it does not feel like 3 hours. It's almost 3 hours long. It's just a completely fun ride. You know, there's no way around it. And it's super violent. It's super edgy. It's over the top. It's everything you could want in a movie, really.
Yeah.
What more can you say?
I think we talked about, what was it we talked about ad-libbing with James Cagney, where he ad-libbed the fruit scene. And I said, like, it's great when actors do that. And I mentioned Midnight Cowboy, where the cab almost hit Dustin Hoffman. I'm walking over here. It almost feels like Al Pacino's riffing this whole movie. Like, everyone else is doing their parts, and Al Pacino's just like, "Yo, fucking guy, this fucking guy, oh motherfucker," and he's just like doing that in the background. And I'm like, let me see that script. Are all these fucks and motherfuckers actually written in the script, or is he just like riffing as these scenes are going on? Especially in that car ride where they're gonna kill the senator or the politician, and then the wife and kids go in the car, and he's like, "Shut the fuck up," and he's like, he's like, "Fuck you, man. You don't talk to me like that. You don't do like that, man. I don't kill no women and kids, man. I don't kill no fucking cockroach." And he's just ripping and go. I'm like, there's no way all that's in the script, because he's just nonstop talking to himself in the car, going on and on and on. But just his energy was amazing. We already went into the 32 version with our review for that, and how much I loved Paul Mooney's performance, and how I seeked out every movie Paul Mooney made after that, until I got to the Earth movie. What was it?
The Good Earth.
Until I got to the Good Earth, and I'm like, you know what, I had enough. But yeah, as much energy as Paul Mooney brings, and the charisma, Al Pacino matches him here. I mean, Al Pacino is just on top of his game. No, this isn't. Again, I could see why people didn't like this, because in the 70s, Al Pacino was a serious actor. He was in Panic in Needle Park. He was in the Godfather movies. He was in Serpico. And these are not just great movies. These are serious movies. These are Oscar movies. These are culture-changing movies. because the 70s people took filmmaking very seriously, which is why in the 80s, like movies that are campy like this took off, because it's like, you know, people got tired of like the 30-minute, you know, Doors song or the 20-minute Led Zeppelin song and like the 4-hour Deer Hunter movie. Like the 70s were a time where people took themselves really seriously. So the shift to the 80s, where it was just all about like pop and fun and, you know, quick short songs and short movies, and just like, you know, we're gonna play the entire music video in the movie and these Rocky movies and montages and all this stuff. I think, yeah, if you isolate this movie and say, yeah, this is a bad career move for Al Pacino, this is not what I expect for Al Pacino, you have to look at the culture at the time. And it was just a culture shift, and he was just shifting into that culture. You know, he wasn't going to keep making Serpico movies in the 80s because that's not what people wanted. This is what people wanted. This is why I think the fan loves this movies more than the critics, and why maybe it hasn't aged as well, because over time you don't put things into the context that they belong in. Instead of putting this into the context of the 80s, they just look at this overall body of work and say, hey, Godfather is way more better as a film critic. Like when I'm watching The Godfather and I'm watching this piece of crap, I'm like, oh, no, you have to put things into the context. And contextually, the 80s, the cocaine, the full music video in the middle of the movie, the one-liners, again, the cultural impact, Money, Power, and Respect, that was a big song that was part of some of the dialogue. 10 Crack Commandments, that was another hip-hop song, part of the dialogue. This is a huge influence on the culture. Grab the Yayo, that was a line that people, you took that clip and put them in like little skits in their videos, and people started using the term Yayo instead of cocaine. Just all that stuff. And even like the great moments, like a lot of the great moments, like you said, was strictly taken from the 32 version. But there was a lot of great original moments in this. Like when he pretended like his friend was his brother so that they would kill him first, instead of, he's like, oh no, don't kill him, he's my brother. You know, it's like, it was not his brother. You know, he was just stalling for time because he knew after a certain amount of time, he told him like, if I'm not here after 15 minutes, you got to come and get me, you know? So
yeah.
Just like clever things like that. I just thought this movie was just amazing. Yes, it's campy, it's over the top, it's silly, but that's what the 80s were, you know? And this movie is a time capsule for the 80s. Again, critics are going to love the original more than they love this. I too love the original more than I love this, but I also acknowledge that, like, you can't say Paul Mooney did a great performance and Al Pacino did the shitty over the top performance. They both were over the top. They were both ridiculous. Paul Mooney's a fucking Jew. He's not Italian. I don't care if like Pacino's not Cuban. You know, like Paul Mooney wasn't Italian either. And they both played it way over the top. So I think, yes, I love the original more. But to me, people that view the remake as just like Crash and the original as like one of the greatest movies ever made, you might be right, but don't shit over the remake. The remake is a fucking great movie too. And they're both like super freaking entertaining.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I enjoy this movie a lot. Interesting too that Brian De Palma directed this movie, and he's kind of known as kind of a Alfred Hitchcock imitator, I guess. A lot of his movies are very Alfred Hitchcock, you know, Dressed to Kill, Body Double. This movie sits there in between, and it's really nothing like Hitchcock, right? It's a completely different kind of movie. And it works, you know? It might be one of his more loved movies in a way. People really love this movie. They're huge fans who walk around quoting this movie all the time.
Oh my God, there's so many quotable lines. How can you not quote
it? Exactly. So, yeah, it's definitely worth watching if people haven't seen it. And even if they have, it's worth watching again, because I guarantee you don't remember everything.
Yeah. And again, even if you like the original and you view the original as a classic, that shouldn't tarnish how you view the remake. And if you like the remake and you've never heard of the original, trust me, you're gonna love it. Even though it's old black and white, they're both great movies. You know, one is more serious great and one is more entertainment great, but they're both immense watches and they're both fun. And even if you think like, hey, a 3-hour movie is too much, it's the type of movie where you could just like be walking in and out of the room and just catch particular scenes and be entertained. Like you don't even have to watch the full context of the movie. You could just watch a random scene, and even just if you don't believe me, just skip through the movie and pick on a random scene. You're just gonna be like, oh my god, this is so much fun, you know?
Yeah.
Or you can even just like pause it and then like come back to it later. You won't lose anything. This isn't some like intricate plot where you just have to like dissect it as you go along. It's just a fun movie.
Follow these rules, you have mad bread to break up. If not, 24 years on the wake up.
There are places online that mention the fact that a lot was borrowed from, you know, Pepe, which was made a few years before Casablanca. But it's shocking when you watch them back to back how much was copied. Because the way they talk about the Casbah is the same way they talk about Casablanca. The imagery of showing like the images of the map on the screen as they talk about it, the colorful characters, the love triangle, Paris. While Paris is something in Pepe's mind as like this heaven or this dream world where he can escape the Casbah, Paris in Bogart's mind is what was heaven to him. A time of his life not he's looking forward to, but they can reminisce on and get lost in when he thinks about it. He had heaven with this woman that he was in love with. And the love triangle, instead of like one has two women, one has two guys, but that element's there. You have the police investigator or commissioner, whoever that character is, but that authoritative police officer that is friends with the lead character. Ultimately, in Pepe, that guy betrays Pepe. In Casablanca, he doesn't. But in fairness, because Casablanca was kind of just like copying that movie, they never knew how Casablanca was going to end for a long time, even during production. Part of the reason you not know it was going to end because you're copying another movie. You don't have a set end point. You're just more like, you know, you're following beats, you know, to a certain extent. But yeah, and those are just some of the parallels that come off the top of my head. But there are a ton of parallels. But I wouldn't say one takes away from the other. I mean, movies are all about imitation. So I don't knock Casablanca for copying it. But I do think the fact that Casablanca is so popular and Pepe is not, that the reason I wanted to compare them is because I wanted people to be aware that, listen, if you love Casablanca, this movie is just as good. And you know what? Casablanca borrowed from it. So maybe you should just give that movie a chance, even though it's a foreign movie. And you may not want to read subtitles. It's definitely worth the time to check it out.
As I said before, I had never heard of Pepe Le Moco, and I don't know why. I mean, I've been aware of Casablanca. I saw Casablanca when I was a kid, and have seen it many times, and I did not know that Pepe Le Moco even existed. So watching it for the first time, you know, I went in knowing, because you had commented that it was, you know, Casablanca was very influenced by Pepe Le Moco. So I was definitely seeing the parallels, but I did wonder, though, if I hadn't heard that beforehand, would I have thought of that, or would I have just accepted it as its own story? I'm not sure. It's hard to say. But I do think they are each their own story. And I think in some ways the place, the Casbah in Pepe Le Moco is more of a character in the movie than I would say the place is in Casablanca.
Rick's?
Well, just the city at large.
Okay.
You know, because, you know, for a lot of the movie, you're really just inside Rick's, and it could kind of be anywhere. And I've never thought about it, you know, very much in terms of the outside world there. But in Pepe Le Moco, they really they make a point of sort of explaining how the Casbah works, how it's set up, all the different people who are there, and it really kind of feels like a character in the movie. It feels like a big deal, you know, that you're in this very unique place. But I did right away think, yes, there's a local police officer in Pepe, just like there's a local police officer in Casablanca, who is a friend to the main character. And there's also sort of forces from outside. You know, in this case, in Pepe, it was police, right, who were wanting to arrest him for crimes maybe that he had done somewhere else, unless I'm misremembering. But this local guy is kind of in between the outside and the character of Pepe. Similarly, in Casablanca, you've got the Nazis, right, who are they're sort of in control, except not officially, right, because it's kind of a free state. It hasn't been taken over yet. So the local police have to kind of cooperate with the Nazis in a way, but they're kind of separate from the Nazis. And so it kind of has a very similar feel, right? It's a very similar setup. But I did notice right away that the police officer in Pepe, he, pretty much immediately he's saying, one day I'm going to arrest you, I'm going to put the cuffs on you, or something like that. So he felt a little more antagonistic towards Pepe than I ever feel that the police officer is in Casablanca toward Rick.
Yeah, so that police officer, I think, was kind of the more interesting pivot points between the two movies as far as like how it's portrayed, the relationships. Because you're right, in Pepe, it's more of an antagonistic relationship. However, Pepe is the one that has the officer around by choice. Even some of his buddies are like, why do you have him here? And he's like, oh, he's harmless or whatever. So Pepe chooses to have the officer around. He chooses to let him be a part of what's going on and see and enter in all these places. Whereas opposed to Casablanca, where they seem more like friends, Rick isn't choosing to have the officer around. The officer's there because he wants to be in Rick's to get the women and to like win in gambling to collect his money. So he's just there to use Rick. So even though they're more friendly, Rick isn't having him around by choice. I'm sure Rick would probably prefer to keep his money rather than continue to pay this guy off. Even when the guy's using Rick's to meet women and to sleep with women to give them their papers, Rick undermined him because he let the woman win at gambling so she wouldn't have to sleep with him. So you're right, the relationship is kind of different in that you would think that Rick should hate the officer more, and Pepe, who likes him, the relationship should be reversed is basically what I'm saying. Pepe should not want the officer around when he does, and Rick, who does have the officer around, should, it should be reversed. I'm confusing myself, but the relationship should be inverted. So.
Yes, absolutely. I was also going to say that apparently Casablanca, what we've always heard is that it was based on a play. It was an unproduced play called Rick's Place or something, or Everybody Meets at Rick's or something like that. And I looked it up, and supposedly the play was based on the experiences of the playwright when they went somewhere. I don't remember where they specified, but it was interesting in that I think they said it was the year after Pepe Le Moco had come out. So they talk about their experiences over there a year later, but it made me wonder, well, did they actually see Pepe Le Moco while they were over there, wherever that was? They don't mention that part, but it just seems so, it would be quite a coincidence for them to have just come up with all these very similar ideas. And because I was curious, I thought if the play had been written before Pepe Le Moco, then there would be some question there. But I mean, it was a year after. So yeah, it seems like it had to be an influence.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of Battle Royale in the Hunger Games. So Battle Royale, I think the book was written right before the Hunger Games book was written. And the movie came out before the Hunger Games movie came out. And it's always the latter saying it's a coincidence, not the former saying it's a coincidence,
That's right. Yeah.
It's hard to believe. It's kind of hard to believe it's not been influenced,
Yeah.
But again, they're both great movies, and I'd probably give a slight nudge to Casablanca, but I love Pepe. And I love the whole way you can view it as a heaven and hell type thing, with his character's trapped in hell and he's trying to escape. Casablanca's great too. I mean, they're both great
Yeah.
movies. I mean,
Yeah.
comparison is the thief of joy. That's something
Yeah.
I said earlier. Then I had to Google to make sure that's the right saying, but I'll say
Yeah.
it again here. You know, you don't want to spend too much time comparing them and trying to find faults in one because you like the other more. They're both great. They're both worth watching, but it is worth noting the similarities with them. And yes, I mean, unless you're an idiot, if you watch both of these movies and you know one came out like 5 years before the other one or however long it did, you'd be silly to not think that the latter copied the former, you know. So, but they're both great, you know.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you know, maybe because I have such a long standing relationship with Casablanca, I probably would pick it as my favorite of the two at this point, but I'm just at the beginning of my relationship with Pepe Le Moko, and I feel like I haven't seen it under the best possible circumstances yet. I understand a Criterion maybe is the owner of it at this point, that I think they're distributing it, so they must have a very good version of it, and I'm definitely going to have to check that out. And who knows, maybe over time I will change my mind about which one I think is slightly better to me. But I do think that they are both very good and definitely should be seen.
Any final thoughts before we wrap this sucker up?
Oh, I don't know. Gangster movies, they're great. Specifically 30s.
I did have a cousin that was a roommate of mine for a while when I was watching some of these older movies on Turner Classic Movies. And he would watch some of these and he always say like, oh, man, I hate watching these. He didn't say specifically gangster movies, but he hate watching these rise and fall movies because he's so entertained by the rise that you don't want to see the fall, especially when these guys are so charismatic. It's like you want to see them keep rising, but they're criminals. So there kind of has to be a fall. That has to be the formula in most of these gangster movies, is they have to fall. But I would say, like, don't let that scare you off, because I know for him, that's one thing that made him not want to watch these as much, is because like he'd watch them, and then like when it comes time for that third act, and then that character's about to fall. I remember one time he mentioned that to me, and it stuck with me. It's like, yeah, I can see that being a deterrent for people not wanting to watch these movies, is because you know you're going to watch it and you almost don't want to watch it because you know it's not going to end well, you know? Because it's always that trajectory. You're watching this movie, you love this character, you watch him get built up and he's working his way up the ranks, but then you know inevitably that third act's going to come and it's going to end poorly for this character that we fell in love with, you know? Yeah. But I would say don't let that deter you. I mean, even if you just have to not watch the third act.
Well, when we talked about film noir, I said the same thing, that I had a friend who felt that he didn't like film noir because you knew that it was always going to end badly. Now, that's not entirely true, but a lot of film noirs end badly for the character, and same for the gangsters. It's absolutely true that it usually does end badly. And I think that that is a byproduct of, once again, the Hays Code. And even when we talk about the pre-code era and the three great movies that were made during the pre-code era that we discussed, even though the code wasn't being enforced very strictly, it did exist. And they still had to fight in order to do things. And so they got away with more. They won the fights more often, but they still, I think that was one of the concessions that they made was, well, he'll be punished in the end. You know, he'll get away with all this stuff and he'll have a great time, and he'll, you know, people will kind of admire him and they'll love him and they'll want to be him. And then in the end, he'll pay. And then people will realize, oh, we shouldn't do that. You know, we shouldn't be those kind of guys.
I definitely think that's a big part of it, but I also think like inevitably it has to be part of the movies, because it's storytelling. Like, where do you go? Do you really have like a evil person, as charismatic as they are, rise to the top and the movie ends with them at the top? yes, crime rules. You know, it's like
Yeah.
your movie has to have some kind of art.
Yeah.
You know, you can't just have Skeletor
Yeah.
go against He-Man and then He-Man gets killed and it's just like
Yeah.
ha 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 ha. Grayskull is mine. You know, because
Yeah.
even like
Well,
modern movies like Goodfellas and stuff like that, they're all rise and fall stories. You know, so
Mhm.
while I agree with you, I do think there are limitations to the genre. Where it does have to, and there has to be a fall, no? Like,
Yeah.
it's. I mean, you obviously
Yeah.
have the Godfather movies, where
Yes.
the bad guy wins at the end, but that's bad guys going against bad guys. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily bad guys going against the law.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I agree. I mean, I think I like that aspect of it. I like the fact that it goes all the way to the fall, because if you look at reality, you look at guys like Capone, they did have a fall, right? Those guys didn't rule forever, and it's very rare for a gangster to die of old age and not in jail, right? It's very rare. So I think it's just part of the story that needs to be told. And I mean, anyone really, like if you look at it as life, we all die in the end, right? There's no other way out of this. So everybody's story kind of winds up in that place. It's just hopefully for most of us, it won't be that we're being gunned down in the street. That's maybe one difference. But yeah, I do think it's a necessary part of the genre, and I kind of like it.
I'm not thrilled with it. Because the reason the reason that stuck with me when he said it is because I don't want to see Cagney get killed. Like I like Cagney,
Yeah.
I prefer endings like The Godfather when the bad guy wins, but I do understand you have to tell a story, and how do you wrap up a story of a bad guy winning? Godfather's a unique situation where they make him go up against other bad guys, and then they make the good guys corrupt. So there is no ultimate good force that's winning. It's the better of two evils. It's the evil that you followed throughout the whole movie, and you've seen their good side. And they're killing the cop in the Italian restaurant that's corrupt that tried to kill his father. They're not killing a good cop who's working 9 to 5 and goes home to his family.
That's right.
You have to. There's a way to tell it. Even like Scarface #2, 83. I love that ending too, because he gets killed, but he goes out on his sword, he's like,
yes,
you can't kill me, come on. He's just getting gunned down from behind.
Yeah.
You see his body bounce as he's getting riddled with bullets. God, I love that movie. I'm gonna watch that movie. No, I'm not. Part of me always wants to watch part of that movie as soon as we finish with this podcast. But, yeah. There are ways to end it, but I do think that, again, the reason what he said stuck with me is that some of these movies don't end very well. Of the two Scarfaces, I like the original, but I like the second one's ending better. The first one had two endings. The one that was tacked on that didn't even have Paul Mooney in it because maybe he wasn't available for shooting. And even in the other ending where he's like, oh, I'm scared, and he runs out like a coward. That's kind of I'm not thrilled with that ending. Public Enemy, I didn't like the ending of that. So some of these movies just, as much as you love them, the endings aren't that great. So it's you kind of wish they could find a way to end better. And I think either have it like The Godfather where they end up on top because they're killing other bad people, or Scarface where they die on their sword. Another gangster movie that had a great ending, which unfortunately we couldn't talk about because of the parameters of this podcast, was White Heat.
Yes.
Where it's just like, look, Ma, top of the world, and then he just gets blown up.
Yeah.
What a great ending that was. So there are ways to end these movies, but it's not easy. It's not easy.
Yes.
Even a great movie like Goodfellas, I just mentioned, I hate that ending. It's a great movie. It's a great movie. Then suddenly he stops acting and he starts talking to the camera. I'm like, why are you talking to the camera? Keep acting. Don't talk to me. Act. Keep movie. I hate that ending. Why do you have to stop the movie and start talking to the camera? So.
Yeah. Well, I actually like that ending, and I think part of it is just the fact that he's, even though all this bad stuff has happened to him, he still kind of wishes he was back in the world of the gangsters, right? It's just,
I don't mind that sentiment. I just don't
Yeah.
want him to start talking to the camera. You know, it kind of breaks the illusion.
Well, fair enough, yeah. But I was going to say about The Godfather as well. I think part of it is that it's a dark ending, right? Like he was this sort of very good person in the beginning of the movie who didn't want any part of his family's business.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of the movie, he's been totally indoctrinated into the family, and he's now lying to his wife, right? Like he's become the gangster by the end of the movie. So it's not a fall, but it's kind of a fall.
It is a
in
fall.
way.
Yeah, that's a good point.
In a way,
it is a fall.
you know, in a way. But
no, you're absolutely right. It's a fall.
Yeah,
it's a fall.
yeah. So, but yeah, I think it's. I don't mind the ending when you have a gangster get killed or.
I guess
go to
maybe
jail.
at least be creative. Like you're right. Godfather was a fall, but it's nice the way he closes the door.
Yes.
You know, and you know, Scarface when he's just to the end, you know, like being Tony Montana to the very end.
Yeah.
So I guess there are
right.
ways to end it, top of the world, Ma. Like, you know, there are ways to do the falls. I guess maybe the falls aren't executed great in most of these movies. They're kind of just like, they're not that great. So.
Yeah, well, I think in a lot of cases too that maybe the filmmakers didn't care that much about the fall because it was more about everything else, you know, and they were kind of obliged to, okay, at the very end, the character needs to pay for his crime. Okay, so they just kind of tack on this ending where he pays for the crime.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, maybe in some cases.
Yeah, you got to eat your broccoli.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what the fall is. Yeah, you enjoyed all that chicken and potatoes and whatever you're eating. Now eat your broccoli. You know, well, if I have to.
Well, I remember when in talking about exploitation films, they would talk about the square up reel, you know, where the first 3 or 4 reels of the movie, people are doing all kinds of horrible things, they're getting away with them, and then you have the square up reel at the end where they pay for their crimes. And I think in some cases they wouldn't even screen that reel if they thought they could get away with it. They would just show the first 3 or 4, and then they'd say, okay, that's it, the movie's over. But if there was anybody there who would, you know, get them in trouble or something, no, we'll put on the square up reel where the criminals all get punished at the end.
Oh, so they would have it there by the projector if they needed it, you're saying?
I guess, yeah, that's the story I've heard. I don't know how true that is, but you know, it's that idea of having this very tacked on ending that we need to make this okay, you know. Everything you've seen up to this point, we now justify it by doing this.
Okay. Are we going to have a tacked on ending to this podcast?
Maybe you might have to do that later though with people who aren't us, you know, like just stick something on there that explains everything. The violence toward women, you know, we are punished for.
Yeah, that's it. So, all right, guys, I just want to say that Angus is no longer part of this podcast because his comments about violence towards women. He has been canceled. This will be a solo podcast moving forward. There is your happy ending. How does that sound?
That sounds perfect.